Imagine a world where robots are part of our everyday life, and not only as workers and helpers, but as companions and friends. And furthermore, imagine a world where we can all take part in giant intelligent entities made up of potentially thousands of humans and machines, whose capabilities might well far surpass the current limits of both human as well as artificial intelligence. And finally, imagine a world where all of these amazing developments are not just taking place in the Silicon Valley of California, but also in a small ancient oasis city in the middle of the desert, or by the Sea of the Aegean in a Greek island. These have been my goals when I had just finished my PhD at MIT some years ago. And in some respects, they have started to provide fruit, not only, of course, through my efforts, but through the efforts of thousands of other academics and researchers. In the words of the BBC, talking about my lab, the Interactive Robots and Media Lab.
His name is Ibn Sina, named after the ancient philosopher renowned for his early scientific discoveries. But unlike his older counterpart, this Ibn Sina is altogether more high-tech. As well as being fluent in English and Arabic, he can hold a conversation with humans. He looks for information about us on the internet and uses that to chat with us. He'll also remember it for the next time you meet. But this lab isn't in Japan, China or the United States. It's in Al Ain, just an hour's drive from the UAE capital, Abu Dhabi.
But where does artificial intelligence and robotics really have its foundations? And also, how can it make our world better? And furthermore, what are possible futures that we might be entering? And what are the ways to direct which one we will finally enter? These are the three main questions that I will talk about. But let me start with a big why. Why is this whole discussion important? Part of the answer comes through the US Economic Report of the President in 2016, a 500-page document, out of which 10 pages were for the first time devoted to artificial intelligence, robotics and automation. And amazing benefits are actually quoted. 10% of the GDP growth and 16% of the labor productivity growth can already be attributed to these technologies. On the other hand, if you have a look at this diagram on the right, you will notice something that's amazing in a different sense. The probability of an automation of a task, which is traditionally done by a human worker, depending on his median hourly wage, for the case of workers with less than $20 per hour wage, is 83%. So exactly what Vivian talked about is partially true. It is the case that the higher paid jobs also start to get parts of their tasks to be automated, but the first ones that will go down the line will be things such as car drivers. The probability for $20 to $40 per hour is 30%, and there is this 5% for more than $40 per hour. So this is not just a beneficial change, it's also a highly disruptive one. On the other hand, I would like to paraphrase something that Leibniz had said, and say that it is really unworthy, if you think of it, of potentially excellent men to lose their lives like slaves in labors which are not fitting to humans, when this could be relegated to machines. And this has been happening for thousands of years. So this is a great opportunity, or at least part of it, to be able to grant to an increasing amount of the population of the earth lives that are fulfilling, creative, interesting and conducive to the common good. So this is the why, but let's go to the when. When do all of these things start? Arguably, for most academics in AI, the foundations are in Aristotle. When Aristotle in his syllogisms for the first time shows that you can derive conclusions which are valid on the basis of premises without understanding the premises themselves, but just through the form that they have, then he actually opens the possibility that part of human thinking is not exclusively a human thing and can be given to machines. At the same time, in the Nicomachean Ethics, when he talks about planning and means-end reasoning, he actually gives the first planning algorithm that we use in order to produce human-like action. So both human thought and human action is not exclusive to humans, or part of it at least. But where do robots start? If you go back to ancient temples in Egypt and in Greece, you will see these mechanisms that were called automata, and other automata too. And these were mechanisms that were using hydraulic, mechanic, and pneumatic components to be able to go through sequences of actions upon a stimulus. So the one that you see over here, when you actually turn on a fire in the altar, the door magically opens, almost through a divine intervention. But the word robot actually comes much, much later. 2,000 years later, the Czech playwright Karol Čapek used the word from the Slavic word rabota, which actually means work. And the first robot, the way that we know them, is in 1960, pretty much, through George Devils Unimet. And since then, there has been an amazing increase in the number of robots, which is accelerating in the last years. And interestingly enough, it's accelerating specifically in Asia, which is weird, because you would think this is where we have cheap labor. Why should there be robots? Because very soon the cheapest robots will be cheaper than the cheapest labor, and all of the countries that had the lead in manufacturing want to keep it. But what? What do these things do? Well, it's not just manufacturing anymore. We have medical robots, we have robots in disaster recovery that are trying to do search and rescue tasks, we have robots in the oil industry, we have military robots like the big dog, the mule that you see over here, that can carry very heavy things on rough terrains. And of course you have these semi-autonomous entities like the drones that could be either autonomous or teleoperated in the air, or underwater robots, or space robotics. And many, many more fields are coming up. And the state of the art is actually quite interesting. I'll show you a small sample of the stuff that I had done back at MIT that I continued in different ways to get an idea of how things are regarding, for example, language, memory, and imagination. You can see much more of this in my other TEDx talks. I've given 4 TEDx talks in the past. Where is the red one?
At the top.
Look at the center. So the robot can make a model of the world through vision. What it sees is on the right, it's the camera view. Where is the red one?
Most probably at the top.
What color are the objects?
One is red and the other is green.
And now we're
Imagine a blue object on the left.
Information that there is a blue object on the left, which it hasn't seen yet. So it creates a representation with potential sizes and locations.
Most probably at the left.
How big is the blue one?
I have no idea.
Look at the left.
And now the expectation for a blue object is actually fulfilled.
Okay.
And it knows exactly where it is and how big.
How big is the blue one?
Small.
So actually what you saw was part of the robot replay, which had capabilities comparable to a test that we give to 3-year-old children for connecting language to the senses to action. And actually the words that were being used were taught through examples. They were not hard-coded in meaning. Regarding emotions too,
sadness.
here is even seen, and you can see the display of emotions in human-like robots.
التصديق, disbelief.
Disbelief and excitement.
متحمس, excited.
So robots nowadays can not only display emotions in human-like ways, but they can also recognize emotions through systems such as the one that Vivian showed, and they can even actually start engaging in closed-loop dialogues with emotional content. We did some experiments in storytelling that were very interesting, actually. But the big change for manufacturing has to do with the fact that we go away from robots in cages that work with humans far away from them, to robots that work alongside humans, collaborative robots that can turn, take, and communicate. An example.
Robots on a production line are nothing new, but this one's really special. It's one of the first in the world to work hand in hand with assembly line staff at a car factory. The device is so clever it learns how to help you on the job thanks to high-tech sensors that can feel when you're standing next to it. Although it can be programmed to do anything from make a coffee to give you a head massage, at the moment it's used by Ford workers to lift and position heavy parts on new Fiestas.
And robotics is just one of these suite of technologies that are usually thought of as comprising the fourth industrial revolution. Of course, you have the Internet of Things and augmented reality and other things you will talk about here through the other speakers. Let me start with one of them, this concept of simulation and the digital twin. Since we start to have sensorization everywhere, through the Internet of Things even more so, we can create virtual replicas of physical objects or parts of the world. And then we can use these, because they also have dynamics, to make plans and trials of potential actions in the future, to see what their outcomes would be. So for example, in this case, we have a virtual replica of this container ship, and we can experiment with many different ways to do the loading in order to maximize, for example, the balancing of the loading. And this will get much more detailed and covering a bigger part of the world in the future. With 50 billion Internet of Things devices by 2022, and with less than $1 cost for embedding Internet of Things by 2020, we're going to go from smart objects to the quantified human, all of these measurements of different aspects of our biology and behavior, to smart homes and buildings and cities. And this will create massive amounts of data, which might be extremely useful. And this is why many have started to say that the new fuel, the new oil, if you want, is not petrol or natural gas. It's actually the combination of the right kinds of data, usually massive data, with intelligence. And by intelligence, I mean the hybrid collective intelligence that arises with the right configurations of artificial and human intelligence together. And this creates, if you want, a new geopolitics of information, which has started to appear. I mean, you can see the silos that already exist between China and the rest of the world when it comes to the equivalence of Google and Facebook and YouTube. There is the GDPR and so on. But what are some socially beneficial uses of robotics? A small sampler. I personally had the honor to be a judge in a competition that the Prime Minister's Office of Dubai was running for years. It was called Drones for Good and Robotics and AI for Good, in which amazing institutions, MIT, Stanford, EPFL, came in and actually participated in order to get a $1 million prize. Let me give you some of the basic ideas for technologies that exist, for example, for the elderly. So, a very simple example is this human lifting robot by Japan. The interesting thing, though, to note is that there is a very big and urgent care for these technologies, because in the West there's an increasing number of elderly and not enough people to be able to take care of them. 1 in every 5 people of the world will be over 60 in 2050.
The Giraffe is a mobile telepresence device that allows anyone, family member, a friend, a professional caregiver, to virtually enter a home through the internet from across town or around the world.
Hello, Pat. How are you today?
Oh, I'm fine, Paula. See? Isn't that something?
Oh, that's great.
It has the different days of the week, so I can keep track of everything.
How is everything else going around the house? Any other problems?
Well, there's this new coffee maker. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Just doesn't seem to work right.
Pat, you seem to be walking much better since your hip surgery.
Oh, much better. That was the best thing I ever...
So in this case, robots are also helping human-to-human communication through telepresence, as they're doing in the example that I will show you here from children and robots, and especially from autism therapy, in which the combination of a caregiver with a robot helps the child start bridging its communication with humans.
Let's start on stretching out our arms and legs. Do what I do as best as you can.
Okay.
Let's warm up with some movements. Move arms.
You can do this.
Very good, Jack.
Children with autism often have trouble understanding what someone else is talking about or thinking about.
Place the man on the right side of the space shuttle.
Do you know where right side?
Do you remember?
Yeah.
Take a guess.
Right here.
Try again.
Right here.
Come on, get it over on that. That's it.
Yes. You placed the man on the right side of the space shuttle. Very good, Jack.
Thank you.
So this research at UConn is looking at how can we use robot-assisted therapy to help children to become more in sync with those around them.
And also there's the emerging field of digital biomarkers. I'm personally involved in a non-profit organization that's called the Women's Brain Project, where we're trying to find ways to address some of the issues regarding the health and well-being of women through technologies. The example that I will show you has to do with how these techniques of biomarkers can be used in order to do early diagnosis as well as assistance and treatment for behavioral disorders. So AI together with mobile devices. Finally, I will try to think a little bit aloud regarding possible futures that we might have. Starting with the more dystopic side, there's a number of important open questions that we have started to address, but we still have quite a way to go. Some of them have to do with robots, AI, and technological unemployment. Others have to do with warfare, either traditional warfare or cyber warfare. Yet others have to do with ethics regarding the use of these technologies, but also the evolution of human ethics. Given the future that is coming, the human ethical systems might also adapt themselves too. And finally, we have the singularity and the moment when human intelligence and artificial intelligence will become much more compatible. And also, interestingly enough, this notion of information asymmetry. Nowadays, very few big players have all the data and all the computational resources. And this creates a lot of open questions for the future. But there is a lot of open avenues too. I will show you a video in which I have quite a number of colleagues from MIT too, from Davos, talking about the wider context.
The original Industrial Revolution was driven by the discovery that you could use steam engines to do all kinds of interesting things.
That was followed by additional revolutions for electricity and computers and communications technology. We're now in the early stages of the fourth Industrial Revolution, which is bringing together digital, physical, and biological systems.
One of the features of this fourth industrial revolution is that it doesn't change what we are doing, but it changes us.
We need a different economic model that will allow us to meet the basic needs of every human on the planet, and that will be focused not on growth per se, but on maximizing human well-being.
We have energy technologies that can power our civilization, but how do we get it and implement it at the scale we need at a price that people around the world can afford?
If we're able to do something to transform cities, to make them more efficient, then the impact can be huge.
We can use asset tracking, we can use IT, we can use 3D printing to decouple growth from the resource constraints we have.
The prediction of 5 million jobs lost by 2020 to technology is serious, but the main question is, how will we define work? How will we share the wealth?
How can you have a doctor that really knows a lot about data? How can you have a biologist that knows about medicine?
We have to create a space that enables people to think freely, to think divergent thoughts, to think creative thoughts.
We really need new education or new training.
Fourth industrial revolution has the potential to make inequalities visible and to make them less acceptable in the future.
I was the first person in the world to be able to voluntarily move my legs while stepping in a robot. The cure will be possible if enough of the right people have the will to make it happen.
We're seeing this incredibly exciting convergence of genome editing, DNA sequencing. Governments have a very important role to play in enabling the safe and effective use of technologies.
We need to take responsibility at every level of society to adapt to these technological challenges, which are redefining what it means to be completely embedded in this world.
Even though we have everyday problems we have to solve, we have to find a way to lay the foundations for the innovations of tomorrow.
We have thus gone a long way today. We started from Aristotle and went to modern robots, and we talked about beneficial uses of these technologies and then about dystopias and utopias and the in-between states. Let me just finish by getting back to Greece and asking the following question. What do you think has been the contribution of Hellenism and pre-Hellenic spirit, if you want, in all of these developments? And most importantly, what do you think will be the role of modern Greece and Hellenism in its wider global context in the world to come? This is a question really worth pondering. 70 years ago, my academic grandfather, Norbert Wiener, a professor at MIT in cybernetics, the founder of cybernetics, wrote a book whose title was The Human Use of Human Beings. And it's also worth thinking about the story of King Midas, who made the wish that everything that he touched would turn to gold, with the only really bad effect of consequences that he was not anticipating, which had horrible endings. So the analogy with all of these technologies is quite obvious. We will be increasingly able to make more and more of our wishes as societies and as humanity become true in the future, but we should be very careful regarding what the consequences of these wishes might be. On the other hand, the world in 20 years will be an exciting place in many, many different ways. All of these different types of intelligent entities and devices and capabilities and the abundance that we heard about and so on. So there's a worthy purpose to try to architect this world in order to reach harmonious and mutually beneficial symbiosis within this new world ecology. The only one thing that I think we should certainly be quite careful about. Dreaming and creating this world shouldn't be something that will happen by a potentially small and potentially also uncontrollable elite. This will create alienation of a large part of the population of the world and will get us through a transient phenomenon that would not be really what we would like to have. Therefore, it is crucial that we find a way to all come together from all corners of the world and across nations in order to join hands and dream together, think together, learn together, decide together, and finally act together to bring forth the most valuable gift that these technologies have to give to us. A future that is worthy of the true essence of humanity. Thank you.